It seems to me the traditional media are failing to use the resources of the internet themselves in as full a way as they could. It seems the mainstream media aren't learning more from the social science that's out there, the natural science, and even the opinion and analysis that you can get, which is not necessarily just opinion, but may well have data and information and insights that could be condensed, highlighted, turned into compelling ongoing stories. That's your unique selling proposition. Yes, there are now 12, in 2 years, there are 12 organizations doing great online reporting about Washington, D.C. You still need, I think, something like the Washington Post. It doesn't have to be in print on paper. It doesn't even have to be the Washington Post, but I think you do need that, and maybe the Washington Post does still have a role. I realize it's not necessarily clear that audiences are, in fact, demanding. We do want to separate the facts from the noise. Maybe more audience members want the noise. Maybe they don't really want to understand issues like climate change because it's terribly depressing. My class constantly looks glummer and glummer as the year and as the hour goes on. And I feel slightly guilty about it, but on the other hand, I mean, I feel like that does kind of lead to good citizenship. I think, even though that may be true, that really the public doesn't want all that, I suspect they'd be more willing to spend time and money, and those are the precious resources, on that than they would on the same old news delivered the same old way. And what I'm suggesting is the evidence indicates in polls, for example, on climate change, that that's kind of what we're getting. He said the climate's changing. She said it's not. I don't know. That's really not a unique selling proposition for the traditional media. Why aren't they grasping this opportunity? At least one reason, perhaps, is the traditional news production practices, which go under the name objectivity or fairness. Although they're based on the scientific model, this notion of objectivity, I want to point out that really the way journalism in the traditional media has practiced over the past century or so really diverges markedly from what scientists actually do. Real scientists ultimately draw explicit inferences from their observations, and then they tell stories about them, and they link their particular story to an ongoing narrative about that particular scientific problem. That's not what traditional journalism still isn't doing that enough, it seems to me, as the climate change example suggests. Journalists in the mainstream media don't draw their own conclusions. Instead, they are constrained to let the reader decide, and this leads to what I believe are frequently misleading he said, she said accounts of issues, events, and politicians. The public would arguably be better served if every reporter were given the same license as scientists to honestly draw and thoroughly support their best analytical inferences. The same license, ironically, that bloggers and satirists and opinionated talk show hosts have. So we have this real strange irony that those who are the most dedicated to news as truth, as facts, as material that people can use in their lives as citizens of democracy, they have less individual freedom of expression than all of those sometimes irresponsible, sometimes ignorant folks who are so present in these newer, currently growing media. Why is that? Why shouldn't individual journalists have more freedom of expression? So despite the explosion of all these new alternatives, the mainstream media, the traditional maybe 15, and I'm talking nationally, but I suspect it's pretty similar in terms of dominant media in local markets, they're the essential gatekeepers, the sources of mediated information that certify agendas, largely determine which candidates are viable, which issues are on the agenda. And most of what you see in the rest of all the new media is amplification, commentary on what was originally created by the traditional media. What's ironically missing from the traditional media, I would argue, is systematic mining of the responses to their own reports. that exist in the blogosphere and on the web. That would make their own products more valuable commercially and more valuable civically. At least that's what I would suggest we think about.